Welcome to Connection Oasis. We're Hope and Renee, two friends sharing our stories, lessons, and laughter.
Everyone who's crossed our path has taught us something about ourselves, and that's what we explore here: connection, growth, and a little humor along the way.
Well, this week we are shifting into a chapter that Hope wrote. The title is Bags. And this is going to be our first episode about this topic, bags, baggage, however you want to look at it. Because even without coordinating our chapters, I also ended up writing a chapter about baggage. And so I think during our journeys, it became clear to both of us that this is something you have to deal with. So,
Absolutely.
um, my chapter is called That's My Bag, unfortunately. Um, but the one we're going to go over today is just called Bags. So if you want to follow along in the book, what is interesting is that we both kind of came at the same topic on our own, but from completely different perspectives.
Yes.
So oddly enough, since it's the same topic, you would think there would be a lot of overlap, but honestly, I think they're going to be very different. So
Yes.
over the next couple of episodes, we'll end up unpacking both of those. But we're really going to focus on Hope's experience today, what she carried, what that looked like in real life for her, and how she started working through it. Because I think a lot of people just don't realize how much they're carrying until it starts to feel very heavy.
I completely agree. And I do have to say, I was amazed when I read our two chapters that the perspectives were as different as they were. When I carried the weight of my emotional baggage all by myself, it threatened to just crush me.
Mm-hmm.
And as I suspect is the case for many people, I didn't think anyone would willingly accept my baggage. Um, as I started to think about, talking about this week's chapter, I was reminded of visiting my youngest at college. She was fortunate enough to get one of the older dorms on campus. And of
Mm.
course, she was on the third floor in this old dorm with no elevator. So, what she would do was when she needed groceries or supplies or toiletries or, anything at all, she would just kind of have a list going and she would wait for dad and I to visit.
Of course.
So that when we visited, we pick her up, from the dorm, we'd go somewhere, have a nice meal. And then she would be like, "Hey, I need to pick up some things."
That sounds so familiar.
Yeah, yeah. So she has built-in help carrying all this. Inevitably, anytime we went to visit, she would, we would go shopping and she would just stock up on anything and everything that she could
Mm-hmm.
possibly think of. So by the time we get back to the dorm, we have so many bags and extra waters and
Mm-hmm.
the bottled water like by the case. So, the other interesting thing about my daughter is that she was very opposed to making multiple trips.
Oh.
So, my husband, inevitably, as the strongest of the three of us, he would end up carrying her 2 cases of water up the
Mm.
stairs, which meant everything else she and I had to carry.
Yeah.
So, one of these trips, we really try to convince her, listen, it's 2 trips is not that big a deal. We're here to help you. It's really not. And she's like, no, no, no. We don't need to do that. Like, we can get this. So I'm like, well, let's see what happens. So, I stock up as many bags as I think I can actually make it up to the third floor with. And so she has decided that she's going to get all the rest of them.
Mm.
So she has all these plastic bags, hung on her arms all the way up to her elbow. We kind of leave the car. She's like, oh, it's not that bad. And so, her dad and I just kind of look at each other like, okay. We get into the building and we're headed toward the stairs. And the first flight was not fun, but we made it up the first flight.
Mm-hmm.
So we stop on the landing And at this point, the weight is starting to sort of weigh her hands down. So as
Yeah.
this happens, the bags are all sliding down. So all
Mm,
the weight is at her wrist at this
mm.
point. So when we head up the second flight of stairs, there's somebody coming down. So, of course, we all smush against the wall so they can pass by. And by this point, the bags are all at her wrist, and she's just trying to hold on and not drop anything.
Right.
And she looks up to, smile at this passerby and just be polite. And when she does, we hear this bag of cans smack her in the shin.
Ow.
So we're like snickering and laughing, and she's kicking soup cans up the stairs. And so she kind of makes this sort of laughing, crying sound. And at this point, we're all laughing. And
Mm-hmm.
so there's a very real threat that like everything's going to just be dropped and fall down the stairs. So
Right.
she finally, some of her bags slip off of her wrist.
Mm.
And between laughing and trying to drag all of this crap up to the landing, we're just a motley crew. But so finally, we do make it to the landing, and from there we convince her that 2 trips is not that bad from here to her room. So, well, it just made me laugh because you don't really realize how something gets heavier as you carry it.
Mm-hmm.
And so the point was that, when we left the car, she felt like these bags were manageable to her. And
Right.
she was confident she could carry these and she can make it to the third floor.
Mm-hmm.
And the farther we got, the less realistic that goal became. And I think that is such an apt description of emotional baggage. So, my particular type of trauma, it left me just feeling dirty and embarrassed and less than and just generally bad about myself. And so I decided that I'm not going to tell anybody about this, and I
Mm-hmm.
don't want anyone to see this. So I made a conscious decision to carry it alone and to absolutely hide how I was feeling.
I don't think that's unusual. I think a lot of people feel that way about trauma, especially in situations where they were a victim. Um, I've seen people who think they have it all hidden and covered up and buried and it's not visible to anyone. But if you step back, you can see how it seeps out into their lives and basically, into their relationships a lot, in so many other ways. And I don't think you can ever truly hide trauma.
And that was me. I convinced myself that it was hidden, but I know that there were things that people saw that maybe they didn't exactly know, but they knew that there was something that I was carrying.
Hmm.
And so when I shared my history of sexual abuse with my husband, I didn't share that burden in hopes that he was going to help me carry it. I actually shared that because I thought it made me unworthy of him.
Hmm.
And so, to my utter and complete amazement, he didn't run away from this burden. And he even wanted to help me carry it.
Which is amazing. I
Yes.
think if you find the right person and you're able to take that step with them, it most likely will turn out better than you think. Um,
Yes.
Something you thought you always would have to hide and carry alone was now something that you could share, and that had to have strengthened the relationship.
Well, and me, I think, in that moment, I felt completely overwhelmed and off balance because nothing went the way I expected. And
Mm.
but I think that was probably one of the first times that I'd ever even said the words out loud.
Oh, wow.
And yeah, and so when I did and he didn't look at me like I had grown a second head, um I thought, maybe I'm not seeing this trauma for what it actually is. So this was a thing that was done to me. I didn't
Mm-hmm.
choose anything, I didn't do anything to deserve it. The thing was done to me.
Right.
So, I started to think about it as if, okay, if I were hit by a car and I have a broken leg, I wouldn't be ashamed that the car was able to break my leg. So,
Mhm.
someone stole my innocence. They amputated part of me, and I can't get that back. So, the things that I felt, the shame, the humiliation, those things aren't mine. They belong to the people who chose to victimize me. And those people would
Absolutely.
never admit what they did to me.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure they have so much shame and humiliation that it would be hard to admit. But yeah, it's theirs. Definitely not yours. So when you actually told your future husband at the time, like, was there an immediate relief or lightness, or did that take a while to set in? Like, how did that go?
Um, that is a great question. I was absolutely positively terrified to tell him. And those feelings I can remember very vividly. I mean, I was so nervous that I was literally shaking,
Mm,
and I had that I describe it as like an electric current in my stomach, and it just feels like stabbing and nausea. And honestly, I was so afraid that he was going to hear this and just be disgusted because, well, that's how I felt. It
right.
made me feel disgusted. And I wouldn't say that I felt any immediate relief or lightness, but the thing that did happen for me is that I realized once I had started talking about it, he didn't react the way that I feared he would. And so I said a little bit more and a little bit more. And
Yeah.
I felt different. I don't know that in the moment I felt any relief yet, but I felt less fear about talking about it.
Hmm.
And his compassion and understanding caught me off guard, which was really good. And I honestly, I just, I had to take a second and think, maybe I don't actually see this for what it is.
Hmm.
So that process of reaching that realization, it definitely didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen, in the moment, but it did begin, and I began the process of working on it and accepting, all of these things. And that process took years, many years. Um, so when I think about trauma and how it just really leaves an impression, I think about my daughter when she was, oh, I don't know, 8 or 9. Just a typical day. We went out for dinner, nothing special, and they had after dinner mints. So, she grabs a mint. We go to the car, and she pops her mint in her mouth, and like little kids, she's just chatting away about, some cartoon she loves. And she's just, passionately explaining why this is just the funniest thing in the world. And I'm not a mint person. So I had opted for a coffee after dinner. So
Hmm.
she's chatting away. And then she starts making this really strange noise from the back seat, this sort of cough throat thing, like, ah.
Yeah.
So I was like, "Hey, are you okay?" And she was like, "Oh, there's something stuck in my throat. Oh, there's something in my throat." And I'm like, "What?" She says, "Ah, where's my mint?" So it's like, "Wait, what?" So now she's like having a panic attack.
Oh
She's like,
God.
my mint, I'm choking on my mint. She was like, I need a drink, I need a drink. Well, the only thing I have is my coffee. So I just hand her my coffee, and she's like, oh my God, oh, this is terrible. This is awful. It tastes like dirt. But so she does eventually, she drinks my coffee, and then eventually, the mint kind of dislodges from her throat. And at this point, she's drank my entire coffee. And, my husband and I, we think this is hilarious. She's just beside herself. But, the funny thing about it is to this day, she won't drink coffee. She won't even
Yes.
smell it. She hates the smell of it.
Oh my God. I tried to get her to try chai tea. right? And she
Yes.
was so dead against it because she was convinced there was going to be coffee in it. And I'm telling her, there is no coffee in it. And we're at a coffee shop. There's going to be coffee in it. I'm like, no, there's no coffee. So she finally does try it. She finally tries it. And she just looks at me. She's like, it doesn't taste like coffee at all. I'm like, there's no coffee in it.
Oh, that is her thing. Like anywhere we go, if there's a hint of a chai, she is all about it. Like that's her favorite thing now. So, but obviously, she actively avoids anything that reminds her of coffee in any
Hmm.
way. And she actively associates coffee with, as we call it, the mint coffee trauma. But it left a deep, like, lasting impression on
Yeah.
her
Yeah.
about coffee.
Hmm.
Um, and so it's many traumas affect everyone in different ways. And I had a very deep trauma. And I came to a point where I wanted it to just stop ruining things in my life. And once I realized that hiding this thing, or trying, I'm sure unsuccessfully, to hide this and avoid this trauma, it didn't make anything better. So I just decided, you know what? I have no choice but to work through it.
Yeah. And that sounds so easy just to say, I'm going to work through this. It rolls off the tongue pretty easily, but that's really brave. I don't want to gloss over that. So many people never get to that part. And the fact that you were like, hey, this terrible thing happened to me, and I'm tired of it impacting my life. You should be so proud of yourself for even wanting to face it. Uh, that has a large and lasting impact on your life. It was huge. And to come to that decision alone, whether how much progress you made after that is irrelevant at this moment, like the fact that you were willing to is the biggest step.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Um, we talked last week about strength, and I wanted to feel strong. And, from the day that we met, one of the things that inspired me about you was you were always courageous from the second I met you. And I just love that. Like I was inspired to find my courage, because of our friendship. So at that moment, I was determined to do the work, and I just decided I'm gonna become the woman that I want to be. And
Hmm.
I don't know that the work is ever actually done. I'm still doing that, but I just decided I'm going to try my best to be the woman I want to be.
Yeah, and that's amazing. So, what does that look like? Like to me, that's a huge task. And where do you even start?
For me, I it took me a while, I think, to get my arms around all the ways that I was affected, that I maybe didn't realize it was seeping out into my life. And so the very first step for me that I recognized there was a shift was just admitting that I was abused as
Hmm.
a child, and without owning the shame associated with that. So that was the first step that I felt a shift. And then I realized that the more frequently that I was able to just verbalize it, the less power it held over me. And this took practice.
Yeah.
So I had to say it in the beginning to people that I really trusted the most,
Hmm.
um, who would accept it and do everything they could not to make me feel worse about it.
Yeah.
Um, and then so the next step I think would be recognizing that when the abuse comes up in my life, or a trigger that is related to the abuse comes up, I have to give myself permission to take a second and just remember that those feelings, the guilt and the shame, those aren't mine. They
Mm-hmm.
don't belong to me. And I have to allow myself to not own that anymore. Um, and that's a bigger step than it probably sounds like. But, to your point about strength, it takes reps.
Mm-hmm. It
And
does.
so the only way to get better at it is to just do it. And avoiding it, I didn't make any progress whatsoever. So the reps were huge for me. And then I think the third step, in my opinion, is I accepted that these scars and these ugly parts that didn't make me feel good are still part of me. The scars are, not something that I would any longer let myself feel ashamed of.
Mm-hmm.
So just, it sounds overly simplistic, but just accepting that I'm imperfect and that that's okay. And again, it sounds easy to say, but it takes reps.
Yes, it
So,
does.
yes. So when I get triggered, the first thing I have to deal with is me. So to deal with me, once I get myself under control, then I can explain to the trigger man that I've survived abuse and that I have these triggers.
Mm-hmm.
And currently, I have I avoid apologizing. And the reason I do that is because in the past, I would have a reaction that was instinctual and then I would apologize. And then I felt bad about myself again, like I've done something wrong. When
Mm-hmm.
that wasn't a choice that I made. These are instinctive reactions because someone wronged me as deeply as they could.
Mm-hmm.
So, in reality, I'm dealing with anxiety that somebody forced me to take. So, I what I do is I explain in that moment that I have, anxiety and I have these triggers, and that I haven't done anything wrong because my instinctual reaction, again, is I'm learning to recognize it, but
Mm-hmm.
also this person who triggered me, they're not wrong either.
Right.
And so there is no blame to assign to anyone except the person who forced this anxiety on me.
Mm-hmm.
So, in being able to look at the situation for what it truly is in a rational sense and not an emotional sense, then I don't feel wrong. And the person who accidentally stepped on my trigger doesn't feel wrong either.
Right.
Um, Another thing that I wish I had learned sooner in this process was some breathing techniques to calm myself because um, those triggers, they trigger anxiety. And when you're in the middle of an anxiety attack, which, especially the younger I was, the longer they would last. So once my anxiety was triggered when I was very young, I could be in that state for days of
Wow.
just highly alert, can't sleep, on
Mm.
edge. And, I didn't realize at the time that there was any other way to be.
Right.
But at the age, of 40, I started figuring out and actually you turned me on to some meditation videos and the breathing techniques and being able to focus on something internal, and being able to rely on me to calm myself was
Mm-hmm.
actually a huge help.
Mm. No, that's great. In our book at the back, there's a section called the tool shed. And there are several tools that we both used, we learned, we found along the way through different stages. But the meditation and the breathing are the two things that I have found effective in my everyday life. Some of those other tools were just, to get me through that phase.
Hmm.
But this one seems to have so many applications
Yes.
that I've definitely stuck with that. And I use them differently in each steps, but they do continue to be the most versatile tool in my tool shed as well. So highly recommend.
Yes, absolutely. So helpful for me. Wish I'd found it sooner in the process. Um, it's definitely no secret that, we all have emotional baggage of some sort. And The heaviest of those are definitely the ones that we carry alone.
Mm-hmm.
I have suffered sexual abuse in the past. I don't go into any details in the book because it's not necessary. Those
Mm-hmm.
people who share my frame of reference will understand just too deeply. And to any of you listening who can relate, that really sucks.
Yeah.
But the fact that you can, it means that you're stronger than those people who sought to break you.
Mm-hmm.
So for that, I just could not admire you any more deeply. One of
Yeah.
the most important things that I've learned is that my baggage is so much easier to carry when I let people help me. And my journey, my trauma, all of it has afforded me unique opportunities to gain knowledge and understanding. And I want to continue to seek any opportunity to use the knowledge to help anybody that I can. So, all the work I've done on myself has really grown me to the person that I am now and the person that I'm finally comfortable with.
Thank you for sharing that. I have talked to some women who have read our book, and they have told me that they do relate to this chapter very deeply, and that just knowing they're not alone was comforting. But I will add that I think your blueprint of how you started dealing with this, I think that's the hardest part. And I definitely think that those who relate to this will find comfort in that as well.
Thank you.
Thanks for joining us here at Connection Oasis, where we discuss real life lessons about relationships and boundaries
And becoming who you actually are without the fluff.